Promise. I'm Jeniffer Thompson.
And I'm Chad Thompson.
And I've got a little bit of a scratchy throat here today, folks, but bear with me. It's going to be an awesome interview. In fact, we're interviewing Keith Rosson for the second time. We had him for his book Road 7, which was phenomenal. Go get it. And that was episode 19, I believe.
19.
Wow.
And then we skipped a book with him.
We did.
And now we're on to this one.
Well, 2 books, I think. Is that right? How many books have you written since Road 7, Keith?
Yeah, I did. I did the story collection.
That's right.
Folk songs for trauma surgeons, and then I did Fever House.
That's right.
Last year.
Okay, that's right. That's right. And
I mean,
this
you're
is.
not going to do it every book. Nobody expects that, you know.
I totally would, Keith. We love you. We are huge fans, and we would absolutely interview you for every single book. But you'd be like, I've done that one.
Oh, the premise again.
Those people.
Yeah. Right.
So for our listeners, let's just tell them a little bit about Keith. Keith Rosson is the author of the novels The Devil by Name, which we're going to talk about today, Fever House, Smoke City, Road 7, and The Mercy of the Tide, as well as the Shirley Jackson award-winning story collection, Folk Songs for Trauma Surgeons. His short fiction has appeared in Southwest Review, Nightmare, Cream City Review, Pink, Redivider, December, and more. He lives in Portland, Oregon. Keith Rosson, thank you so much for joining us here on The Premise.
Oh, I'm so excited. I really appreciate it. I had so much fun last time, even though I believe my laptop kind of exploded and died the last time we tried to do this a couple years ago. So
it totally did. It was like, for me, it was like one of the best interviews we'd ever done. We were just having so much fun with you and laughing and all this great stuff.
Right.
And then your computer literally died. It didn't. So listeners, it didn't, like, the battery didn't go dead. Mm-hmm. Like the computer died. We lost it all.
It was salvageable. I had to get another one.
Yeah. So we rescheduled, and then we were like, wait, did we talk about this already today or last time?
Yeah.
But it was still
just that spark, you know. It was still good. But the spark was just
It's like, yeah, you just can't get it back. But you know what? We did. It was a great interview, and
yeah, it was cool.
I love telling people about you. I love your writing, and today we're talking about 2 books because this is a duology. The Devil by Name is the second book in the series, with Fever House being the first. And Stephen King recommended your book, which is amazing. How, tell us about this.
You know, we one of the crazy things is I did 4 books on an indie publisher, Meerkat Press, and the woman who runs Meerkat, Trisha Reeks, she and I pretty much did everything together as far as like design, editing, promotion, and all this stuff. And so she does 99% of that stuff all by herself, you know?
Wow.
And the wild thing about jumping to Random House is that they have teams worth of people where it's their job to get your book in front of people. And we tried and tried and tried to get Fever House in front of Stephen King, and it just didn't quite land and didn't happen for whatever reason. But the nice thing is that it happened really organically because Joe Hill, his son, who is a tremendous horror writer as well, read a copy of it and really just has done so much to boost the book, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then
that's cool.
Just through that closeness, Stephen King saw it, saw that I got to get my hands on that copy. And Random House, of course, was ready to go with that. So they got a copy in front of him, and he loved it.
Nice.
And he has just pushed the hell out of it ever since. PBS did a thing where he was asked books that he likes, and he listed it, and he's tweeted about it multiple times, and just tremendously fortunate.
It's so awesome. And you deserve it, man.
Oh, thank you so much.
Your books, and that's the crazy thing is, you do everything right, and it just takes that one thing that suddenly tips it over the edge, and now all of a sudden it's taken on a life of its own.
Yeah, it's so cool because with the duology, with The Devil by Name being out, the book Fever House, they have a little bit of a longer shelf life, which is great. But Fever House is still going really strong.
Totally. Yeah.
And it's so cool to see a book have legs like that,
Absolutely. Well, and what's funny is I knew that it was the second book, but I didn't know you had to really needed to read Fever House. At least I think so. You will be better served by reading Fever House first, for sure. I mean, there were things you did that get the reader up to speed if you didn't read Fever House, but you are really shortchanging yourself if you don't read that book first, because
Yeah, totally.
and I read them back to back. So
Oh,
I've been
yeah.
reading horror for like the last 2 weekends and
Yeah,
evenings.
800 plus pages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Right before I go to bed, it's the perfect time to read a horror book.
Right, totally.
I love them both. And, you know, we got to be really careful because there's so much I want to talk about, but I don't want to give anything away to our listeners because as it's revealed, it's like so fun. And so I'm not going to take that away from our listeners. So we're going to like dance around some of the things that happen in this book.
And we also have the magic of editing we can work with too.
So. Oh, if we say things we shouldn't say.
Ha
ha. Well, I got to say.
Yeah. Take that, listener.
Right. You won't even know. Today is actually September 10th, which is your pub date. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such it's so weird, like where it's starting to feel a little bit old hat, which is just absolutely insane to think about.
Totally. That's awesome.
All this kind of emotional buildup
Right.
for months and months.
Right.
And then it happens and it's like, oh, I still am walking my kids to school and the dog still did what the dog did on the, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like you're still like a human.
Like no one,
going about your day, so.
No one knows you're waving to your neighbors.
Yeah, right. It's like, it's cool, but it's not that big of a deal all told, you know?
Well, I mean, for those who don't know.
Yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, how does Random House differ to Meerkat, which was awesome? I remember you saying her praises and that whole process. But in terms of like them giving you information about what's happening with the book, like, are they pretty communicative about that?
Oh, absolutely. And there's this very dorky thing, like an author portal where it's updated like every single day, where you can go in and see like sales and all that stuff. Like, and it lags like maybe a week behind, you know?
Okay.
But it's amazing.
How was that Stephen King bump?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very helpful. It was the PBS thing. And Jason Pargin also did like a TikTok video the same day.
Yeah.
And so
and he's an author, right?
Yeah, like John dies at the end.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Other things.
Something about spiders.
So between those two, yeah, exactly. It was the best sales week since first week.
Wow.
So it did really well. Yeah. So I can't remember where I was going with that. But so as far as Random House goes, it's almost like I have moments of like not necessarily guilt, but like trying to turn it into gratitude because you recognize how fortunate you are to be there, to have this like group of people who it's their job to get your book in front of people, you know?
Yeah.
And just how fortunate you are to be in that position, you know? And they're like, it's a little tricky because all the publicity folks are rad and they will approve about 20% of my ideas.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hey, let's try this. And they're like, Keith, we've run the numbers and, you know, it's not going to work, man.
That's interesting. Can you give us an example?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Don't
mean to put you on the spot.
book events.
Like what?
Book events.
Okay.
Like book tours and things like that. Post-COVID, book of tours haven't really recovered. And so logistically, it makes more sense for a big publisher to use the money that they would spend on like flying somebody out on like a 10-date tour.
Right.
Doing like Amazon ads and things like that, you know?
Yeah.
Where it's just kind of, it gets the book more in front of people more. Because even if you sell 20 copies at every bookstore, you know, numbers wise, it just doesn't quite pan out. But you know, a lot of times they'll do things, I think it's called like author appreciation or something, where they'll be like, let's send them on a 5-day thing, just to kind of appease them a little bit. You know what I mean? You can feel good and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but again, like they have done this for so long that they know what works.
Right.
You know, so occasionally we will politely butt heads about like, I think this would be cool. And sometimes they'll say yes, like we get to do Devil by Name t-shirts this time around to send out to people for like in like promo packages and stuff, which was something that I had broached last time. And so this time they're like, hell yeah, we'll do that.
You know what I love the most are the zines and the guitar picks.
I know, that was so fun. Again, it's like little ideas. Those were both Random House ideas too. So the zine is full of little auxiliary things like that kind of correlate to Devil by Name and Fever House, and the guitar picks are for a band called the Blank Letters, which is a band that features pretty prominently in the first book. And so it's just neat little things like that,
Yeah. In fact, Chad and I want to get our hands on those 2 items.
Oh, I have sent all of them out.
Have
let
you?
me see what I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I saw it I think it was on your Instagram, and I was like, oh my God, that's such a great idea. And one of my questions too was, I have the ARC, so I don't know what the final book looks like. And when we're looking at the reports, like the government top secret reports, the zine makes them look really cool. Does that same design land in the final product?
No, it's very much like typeset in the same manner that Fever House is, where it's it's more functional readability,
Yeah.
The zine was really a cool way to just get like, because I'm a designer too, and so I was able to like just get really dorky with like top secret layouts
Totally.
and stuff like that.
I saw you all over that. Well, and that was going to be one of my questions is, you designed your book covers for your past books, but you had to relinquish that over to Random House. And how was that?
Yeah. It was really hard. And then they sent the first version of Fever House over, the first cover with the devil hand doing the kind of like devil horns or whatever with the big claws at the end.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of reservations about it because I felt like it was kind of like making light of a lot of stuff in the book. And then like I talked about it and I showed people and my agent showed people and everything. And eventually, like pretty quickly, I changed my tune because it's so the typography and the design is so eye-catching and immediate.
Yeah.
That like you see it amidst 20 books, and it's like that's the one your eye gravitates to. You see it across the room.
100%. Like yellow and red are the first 2 colors that the eye sees when you walk into a room, and your books are yellow and red.
Right, and so the designer really just switched the colors for the Devil by Name, but it's still very much the same like design, layout and structure with the type going going down, up and down versus horizontal,
Yeah.
And it was this woman Ella Latham, who also did stuff like The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Like,
oh yeah, that's a great cover.
Yeah, she is a tremendous designer, and she just killed it.
It's funny because that author, I believe, is from Portland or in the Pacific Northwest, isn't he?
No, I think he's in Colorado, maybe Denver.
Oh, is he? Oh, I got that totally wrong.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it just reminded me of home. Because the people in the
book.
all
the trees.
Because listeners, I lived in Portland, Oregon. I'm from the Pacific Northwest myself. And of course, that's where Keith is. So let's dive in. Let's talk about these books. I read a reviewer say that this was like a new genre that you've pretty much penned, punk rock thrillers. And that I feel like that was kind of apt. That was on Goodreads. I know that you love punk rock and, your books are often steeped in that, but man, did you nail that in Fever House. And it just is so great. And so I have a couple questions. Number one is Catherine Moriarty. Did you get her name from the Gits? From Steve Moriarty?
I think subconsciously I did, and I hope Steve doesn't, take me to court over that. Yeah, I think so, because I think the Gits, bands like the Gits and Bikini Kill, and a lot of like bands who lived through the kind of 90s major label feeding frenzy of punk, were a big influence, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's a thing where like, I think names are so interesting because once you get to a certain point, you realize, oh, I used Nick last book. I got to come up with a different name, you know?
Right.
And I realized that one of the characters in the book that's coming out after The Devil by Name, that's coming out next year, the bad guy, is the name of an author of a book I've read like 10 years ago.
That's fascinating.
Like straight up lifted from it subconsciously, you know?
Right. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So like names are they like, they seep in a way that's like, it's really hard to manage sometimes. But yeah, I think totally like Steve and the Gits and all that like definitely played a part.
Well, and Moriarty is also the villain in Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that is not intentional.
So I'm just saying, if you need like a legal wiggle room in case Steve comes after you.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, and I feel like you really presented the punk rock world in such a great way, like total reality, you know, based on your love of punk. And I just wonder too, if, you know, the paper letters or the blank letters, my bad, isn't based on the Gits a little bit too. You know, just we've got the three guys and the lead singer whose voice is just like so powerful, right?
Yeah, you know, I think, like I said, I think they're a kind of amalgam of the Gits, Bikini Kill, a bunch of other bands, but it's all kind of like subconscious and run through the colander of like my own, what's going to hold my interest as a writer, you know? So like just doing like Gits, you know, a veiled Gits biography or whatever would not have been interesting to me as a writer.
Right, of course. Yeah.
And it wouldn't have worked for this story. But there are definitely elements of it, you know, and again, like just 90s punk stuff, you know, is super threaded throughout and prevalent in the book.
And done so well. And I you know, if I was trying to tell someone recently, like a couple days ago, you got to read these books. They're so good. You're going to love them. And I was saying, you know, it's really, it's horror, but it's so much more than that because the character development is so good. Your writing style.
It's so hard to pin down, right? It's like, how do you distill a 450-page book with like 6 main characters into a paragraph, you know?
Did you struggle with like the backstory, you know, revealing too much or going too deep, or like, was that?
You know, so here's 2 little fun factoids about Fever House. Was one, I had no plan to write a sequel to it.
Oh my God, that was my next question. Really?
Oh yeah, it was going to end with Catherine. I was going to end where it ended.
Good job.
Yeah, totally. And it was going to end where it ended on a somewhat of a cliffhanger. And when my agent, so the cool story is, on a Thursday, my agent and I had worked on the book, and he's like, I'm going to send this out to like six editors, and then we will, that was on a Wednesday, and then we will send it out big on Monday to like, you know, 25 other people or whatever. And so the next day he gets an email from the editor at Random House who says, oh my God, is there a sequel? And then the day after that, that was a Thursday. The day after that, she has her team read it over the weekend. And then on Monday, she emails my agent and is like, I want to set up a call with this guy.
Wow.
So Tuesday, she calls me and she prefaces the call with like, I don't have this conversation with people unless I'm really willing to make an offer. Which is just like, that just blew my mind, you know, because it was like life-changing.
Yeah.
And then she's like, 2 questions. 1, are you willing to write a sequel? And I was like, I will write cat food copy for you. If you know what I mean? I'll do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And I had kicked around the idea of a sequel, you know, but it wasn't like, it was like, if it had just stayed at Fever House, I would have been okay with that, honestly. And then the other thing is, she's like, would you add like 30,000 words to it, including a lot of character backstory, and then what happens in Portland once things really accelerate. And so it's very rare to get
so rare
an editor like,
Yeah.
add another 25% to this book.
For sure. Yeah.
Usually you have to cut it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so that's where a lot of that like kind of backstory and stuff came from, was like my editor asking for more versus less. And she's since said, what the hell was I thinking? Why did I do that? You know, but
did she
at the
really?
time, oh yeah. Well, she was just, I think 30,000 is a lot,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think she would have, in retrospect, probably been like, 15 maybe? You know what I mean? So
did you find that challenging to like, did it feel like you were adding fluff, or did it come pretty easily?
no, it was great. It was, you know, the thing with my agent, my editor, is she's tremendously good and smart, and she makes me rewrite books, which is such a drag sometimes. So like, in the 2 books following Fever House, she's essentially said like, this isn't quite working. And I've had to go back and essentially rewrite. I had to rewrite The Devil by Name, kept maybe 10% of the original material in it.
Holy shit.
And
wow.
Then, yeah. And the vampire book that's coming out after that next year, had to go back and rewrite that with maybe 10% of it. And so with Fever House, it was like the idea of like building scaffolding and adding more to the world was not hard. Like, that was fun.
That's cool. It felt like you were having fun with this book. I read Road 7. I haven't read all of your books, and I loved that book. But this one just felt like, I don't know, like you were really in your element and your groove. And I don't know, maybe that's like the editing process and going back and polishing it, but it felt so spot on to me.
You know, it's weird. I wrote Fever House, a lot of it, like during COVID, during lockdown, and during George Floyd protests.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
there was this, and my kids were finally able to start going to like preschool and kindergarten and all that stuff, like in very short bursts, because we were still like pretty, you know, cautious with like schools were very reluctant to open up full time at the time and everything. And so I had little windows of time where I was able to write, and it was just like, I just wanted to write something propulsive and fast as hell and you know what I mean? Joyous in my way, in the sense of just like
fun,
making it fun for me.
Okay, so here's something interesting. I've never read horror before. I've never read Stephen King's fiction. And I've always wanted to, but I've been like really afraid to do it. And my sister, who you know, Lily, she was like, this is going to scare the hell out of you. And I was like, oh, really? I was like, oh no. So I really had to challenge myself to read these books. And 800 pages.
So your sister read it first and she was like, it's going to freak you out.
Totally. Yeah.
That's great. Right on.
Yeah. She's like, it's going to scare the hell out of you in a good way. And it didn't scare the hell out of me. I found it to be exciting and super fun. And like the parts that scared me were, I mean, if you think about horror, it's like based on the ridiculous and the supernatural and things that like aren't going to happen in the real world, you know? I mean, good versus evil. But like this book specifically, The Devil by Name, I feel like these things could happen. Like it reflects on, you know, greed and, you know, the government and the defense contractors and like all these things that could actually happen. And just another pandemic could wipe out humanity. And I feel like you captured that really well, and that scared me. But like the horror piece of it, I just found it to be really fun. And I'm like, oh my God, maybe I love horror and I have to read more horror.
You know, for one, I think you should give Stephen King a shot, for one, because he does this thing where the dude is just like, it's not stream of consciousness, but it's so easy to just plow through the pages because his style is so affable, you know? And then he slips the dread and unease among that affability. And so you're just plowing along and you're like, oh, I'm starting to get freaked out here a little bit. The characters are so friendly and, you know, he's written them so well. And so, yeah. And then I guess as far as The Devil by Name goes, like, yeah, I don't think they're necessarily horror in the sense of like, I think they're more gruesome. Like there's a lot of gore in it, you know, moments of like profound violence in it. But yeah, as far as, and there are monsters and shit ultimately in it.
Right, right.
But yeah, for me, it's like it fits in more in that nexus of like, yes, horror and supernatural stuff, but also like crime and post-apocalyptic stuff.
Right.
And like that's the stuff that I personally like. I'll always like dip a toe in horror, but like I love crime fiction and I love like literary fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really like a kind of combination of all of those things, I think.
It totally is. I mean, which is probably why I like it so much too.
Yeah.
Because
And it's fun to write. It's entertaining,
You're entertaining yourself.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because like that's the thing is I've tried to write like straight crime fiction 5 million times. And two of the main characters, Hutch Holtz and Tim Reed from Fever House, they started out as main characters in this a number of crime novels that I've tried to write over the past couple of years.
Oh, wow.
And it just like the first 25 pages of Fever House until they find the hand in the freezer, straight lifted from another novel.
Wow, really? That's great. Now,
Yeah.
I love those characters. Hutch in particular. I was so fond of Hutch, and I love the fact that he was such a reader. Like when we start to get into his character, like here are these two goons essentially who are like doing mob boss work, and they're killers. They fuck people up for money, right? And yet I felt like, oh, I really had a soft spot for Hutch. What was his journey initially? Like where were you taking him, do you think? Or do you know?
I mean, very similar. He also like his in earlier books, like his father is like a Vietnam veteran who is like succumbing to dementia, and so he's like kind of staying at home, taking care of him, while all these other events are going on in his life. But that's an old book. So yeah, he's one of those guys where it's like and he's in short stories, and he just would not leave me alone. And it sounds dorky when writers say like, the characters tell me what to do.
No,
like they
totally
don't, but he just bugged me so much, and I kept coming back to him.
Yeah.
And finally I found a place for him to to shine.
Nice. I love that. Let's talk about the point of view in this book, because it's written in third person omniscient. So we get the perspective, the inside voice of the character through the God voice, if you will. And I really loved how much we got like perspective on who that person was as an individual, what they're thinking, their snarkiness. So talk to us about how you decided to choose that point of view. And was that always where you were headed, or did you work on that?
No, I think that's my natural inclination. Like I've written 6 books now, and apart from short stories, not one of them comes from a single POV. So all of my books are like multiple characters, even if it's just 2, like in Road 7,
Yeah.
And I think for me, that kind of like open air world building ability in third person just works better, One of my challenges as a writer is I absolutely want to write one goddamn character in a book. Like I want to put some novel out where it's just one person's journey from page 1 to page whatever.
You mean like
first?
You mean like first person? You know what I mean? Like you only have one character.
Like one character. Like
really?
The same character that starts the book, ends the book, and there's no like, we're going to bounce from this person, this person, this person.
Got it. Okay. Got it. So there's other people. It's just we're following this guy.
Right. But just like, sorry, not one character, but from one character's point of view.
Right.
Totally.
Right. Well, it gives you so much more, I don't know, power to like create emotions and that sense of dread. I think you do it so well.
Yeah. And that's like, again, I have to entertain myself. And it's, for me, sustaining the narrative with any sense of velocity to it, you gotta bounce around a little bit.
Right. Well, in this book in particular, when we're talking about the supernatural, elements and the characters, like it's really important for us to know as readers, like what they are planning.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
also, like, as I was reading it, it bounces around. Sometimes even in the timeline, we'll go back a little bit and get someone else's perspective of something we saw other people go through. And
Right.
I was thinking to myself, what the hell does his writing area look like? Like, how do you keep track of this timeline and what you have revealed and haven't, what needs to be revealed? And like, do you have a process for that, or how do you do that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love questions like this of getting into the dorky minutia of like, how do you write? And yeah, so I have the it's all in Word, you know what I mean? But like I write the draft of whatever first, second, fifth, and then I'll keep another document open that's just notes, and it's like people name, places, um, things to remember as far as like, oh, this is a motivation, or this guy only has 3 bullets left in his gun. Remember that, like
Oh,
all those
wow.
details, you know.
Yeah.
And that can span like a lot of pages. And then I'll also dump, like if I have to cut something, I'll just put it in that document so I can refer back to it. Um, so it's pretty much just those 2 documents that I'm jumping back and forth among. And then I'll do a lot of like handwritten journal writing, and just kind of freestyling about the characters. And I found a lot of ways that a lot of times that will kind of loosen up um, the structure for me, and I can come up with ideas that way that I normally wouldn't just typing things on a computer.
That is fascinating. I have heard this before, that writing with a pen, and well, I guess depends on your generation and how you grew up, but for
Right,
us,
right. Yeah.
like when you actually take a pen and write on a piece of paper, like it does something different. Like your subconscious
Yeah.
is tapped into in a different way, I guess.
Yeah, and it's weird because it takes me a lot longer to handwrite something.
Hmm.
And so I'm almost less worried about it because I'm like, okay, I've already got this idea mapped out, but I need to finish writing it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just a way more like relaxed kind of way of loosening the scree of the plot and like lifting rocks up and seeing what's underneath, you know?
That's cool. That is
Yeah.
cool. I guess as a writer myself, sometimes like I find myself going off on these tangents and I'm like, what am I doing? And I just stop myself. And I think that just shows I'm a newer writer. But it sounds to me like those take you to places, and following those tangents is a really good idea.
And to me, that's 90% of the fun is like coming up with something and being like, oh shit, how do I pull this off? Like coming up with an idea of being like, I want to do that. And then what is the connective tissue from where I'm at now in the story and where I want to be? And it's like, how do I make that happen? You know, that is 90% of the joy in writing for me. It's like figuring out those little twists, you
Nice.
know?
Yeah. Where did you
So,
get the idea for Fever House?
like I said, a lot of it was just Hutch and Tim, and I loved those guys, and I wanted to have them in there. And then clearly the straight crime angle wasn't working, and I had this idea of a severed hand in a like cracked leather, like old doctor's bag,
Right.
filled with money. And so those 2 things were really the impetus, where it was like that's where that kind of connective leap started happening.
Mm.
And I was like, how do I make this work? So there's this guy who's a leg breaker, and then this hand, and the hand does something. I don't know what. And so it's really like I think in Misery, in Stephen King's Misery, the main character is a writer, and he plays this internal game that I think is called Can You? Like, can you do this as a writer? How do you do it? How do you make it happen? And to me, it's really like, how do I make this work between Hutch and this severed hand? And so I just had to start answering questions about like, how does this hand work? What are its powers? What are its effects? And then I had to kind of build the world from that.
Wow. That sounds really fun.
It was so fun. Yeah. The Devil by Name, I think, is like, it's a strong book. And my God, it was so hard to
Mm.
write because I had built such a kind of like puzzle box by the end of Fever House, and all these parameters,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that I had to solve, all these different problems I had to solve to move forward. Because it ends like, things are reasonably effed at the end of Fever House. Trying not to give anything away, but,
Yeah. Reasonably effed. I like that. I feel like there could be a book 3, honestly.
If we ever get like TV and film stuff moving forward, and it takes off, like I could totally see Random House being like, what do you think about a trilogy?
Totally.
But
Yeah.
now there's just plans for the 2.
And as I was reading it, and some reviewers said the same thing, I kept thinking to myself, my God, this needs to be a Netflix series. Like I could totally see it.
Yeah, right.
But can they do it justice? I mean, I don't know.
Right.
It's just different, right? You have a different storytelling way when it's a screenplay or writing a series. So it's going to be different,
Yeah.
but
I can't say anything specific yet because contracts aren't signed, but I did have an option, and then that option was not renewed. And I think the writer strike really put a damper on a lot of projects, and Fever House did not survive. And now we are about to ink a contract for another option for it, and I'm very excited about it. And it's a killer team and a rad showrunner, and
nice.
Very excited. So,
oh my gosh, that would be awesome. I kept trying to picture like some of the characters, and I thought to myself, who does Keith envision? Like Catherine, for example.
Sorry. The closest I can think of, at least with Catherine, is like, I think Kathleen Hanna would kill at it. And like, she's the right age. As far as I know, she's interested in like getting into more acting stuff. And I'm like, she'd be fucking perfect at it.
I don't know who she is. Who's Kathleen Hanna?
Oh, that's the singer of Bikini Kill.
Oh, wait, she's going to be acting? That would be amazing.
Well, no, what I've heard is she is interested in kind of broaching that world, but I can't speak out of turn as how accurate that is or anything. But when I envision a character for Catherine, I think she would be really good at it.
You know what? I just looked her up, and I'm totally, yes, she would be perfect. Yeah. She has the right look. Everything about her looks right. Kathleen, if you're listening, we have plans for you, lady.
Yeah, there we go. That's great.
And then Nick Coffin. Let's talk a little bit about his character. He's a complicated character. He grew up in a pretty yeah. Let's talk about him. Tell me how he came to be. And
I think it's so weird to be like, where did you get your idea?
Yeah,
because almost like so much of it, like Road 7, I don't remember writing a lot of Road 7. And not like he was in a mad fugue state and, high on opium and all that shit. But just like, you don't remember like how those connective acts in the plot took place, you know?
Right.
And so where Nick came from, I think mostly I just kind of had this image of a skinny, like mid-20s kid and very gangly and in like combat boots, like running down the street. And that's like his first scene.
Yeah.
Is he running to meet Hutch somewhere.
That's right. Yeah.
And so again, and then it's like, okay, so you have this character and this character and this character, and they want this or they're afraid of this. How do you make that work?
Right.
And so it's a lot of like writing in my notebook and thinking about it when I'm doing dishes and stuff. And like, if things don't start to gel plot-wise, I've effed up, and I either need to get super crazy with the plot, or I need to step back and cut some words,
right,
and get back to like a simpler spot, and that I think that happened a lot with Nick, where I wasn't quite sure where he fit in, and I had to make a leap and just be like, oh, he and Catherine, there you go.
That's awesome. How long did it take you to write The Devil by Name?
That I think was probably 14 months, because I had to. I wrote the first draft really fast, and it was way more focused on John Bonner and the elements inside the Fever House, inside Portland, because I wanted to try to recapture that kind of crime element
Right. Yeah.
to it. And my editor was just like, it's not working. It's too insular.
Mm.
All these other characters are like, they don't even really come in. They don't all meet up until much later in the book. And so I had to kind of step back and again, rewrite it.
I felt like John Bonner was like the main character. Like he was a really strong character. So I felt that like he was maybe intended to be like the thrust of everything. But you pulled back on him. It's great. Like,
yeah, it was hard because like he was fun to write, and that world, kind of like a crime thing in post-apocalyptic Portland was really fun, and a challenge, but ultimately it just didn't cut the mustard. And it's such a heartbreaking thing. Like the first couple days after you get notes from your editor, and they always end it with like, I'm happy to talk about this whenever you'd like, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, so much work to be done. And then writer brain takes over, and you know, by the next day you're like, how do I fix this problem?
You just do it, right?
Yeah. And it's fun. Even when it's not fun, it's still fun.
That's awesome. I'm so glad. I love that you are 100% writing now, right? That's what you do.
Yeah, this is it, man. This is it.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so your next book, well, actually, is there anything else you want to tell our listeners about this duology before I ask you our final questions?
No, I think that like, please just give it a shot, and probably want to read them in order. And yeah, I feel tremendously fortunate to be on this show. Thank you very much. And to just be able to do this, you know,
yeah.
what I get to do for a living. Like, it's so cool.
It's awesome. Well, we love having you. And I just think you are the epitome of what every author needs to be. You have so much gratitude, but yet you're such a badass. Like, to me, it's like amazing because you're such a great writer. And, you know,
thank you.
As previous listeners know, you know, you're technically legally blind, so you do have a bit of a handicap when it comes to, you know, working.
Yeah.
Right. But you push through and you do it with such joy. It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a weird thing where like, and I think that's one of the main reasons why I'm not doing as much design and illustration as a blind guy, because there were all these various like accoutrements that you needed. And you needed like your computer and all these applications and a scanner, or you know, I haven't made the leap being an older person to, and I say that with air quotes, but like drawing from tablets, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a way you could kind of usurp all this with technology, but I was just finding there are all these trappings of like shit that I needed to use to do illustration stuff. And with writing, it's just a notebook or a, you know, blank computer screen, and you go.
Right.
And that is just tremendously freeing. I don't know if it's necessarily as a legally blind or visually impaired guy, but just as a person, I find that tremendously freeing.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So tell us about your next book. The Bad Guys? Is that what you said?
No, it's called, it's a vampire book set in 1970s Portland. Shocking. And throughout like Montana and North Dakota and stuff. But it is essentially True Grit with vampires.
Ooh,
where
sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's a Vietnam veteran and his adoptive niece hunting a vampire that slaughtered their family.
Oh, okay.
Right.
And does it have a title yet?
Yeah, it's called Coffin Moon.
Oh, nice. Okay, I don't know where I got the Bad Guys. Coffin Moon, very cool. And that's coming out in 2025 in the spring, or?
I'm assuming summer or fall.
Okay.
2020.
Okay. Well, listen, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, people.
Right.
You still have to read Fever House and The Devil by Name. Excellent, excellent books. I have one more question. How are your girls? Last time we talked to you, you had just adopted 2 daughters.
Oh God. Oh yeah. They're great. It's one of those things where at the time when I first started out as a kind of trial by fire dad, we adopted 2 girls who were 2 and 3, weeks after COVID shut down the state.
Yeah.
And so not only were they like, why the hell are we here? But also like, oh, and we can't leave and we can't go to school anymore.
Oh my God.
We're stuck in the house with you guys.
Yeah.
And it was very hard. you know?
Yeah.
And now, almost 4 years later, it's just, this is just life. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
it's just, we play board games before we walk to school, and we walk the dog on the way to school, and the dog poops in the street, and it's a big ordeal, you know, because there's traffic, and you know what I mean? It's just like, it's regular life.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
that's great. I loved the dedication. I think it was the dedication in Fever House where you said, you know, to my daughters, don't read this till you're old enough, or please don't read
Oh
this
God.
till you're 18.
So I'm doing a book launch tonight because it's you know, pub day for The Devil by Name. And I'm like, yeah, so I don't know how we're going to do this, because like, I'd like the girls to come, but they're 7 and 8, and I'm reading a scene from The Devil by Name that is just gnarly as shit.
Yeah.
And my wife's like, you know, they keep talking about how they want to do horror stuff. Like, let's try it. And I got about and she read it in her like funny reading voice that she does, you know. She started reading The Devil by Name, this scene, and they were like, yeah, I'm tapping out. Fuck this. I cannot listen to this. It's too spooky.
It's too much
Yeah.
right now.
So,
Yeah. But they're
yeah, so
interested.
they're not ready.
They're not
They'll
there
be
yet.
reading Clive Barker by the time they're 12.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
totally. I mean, I think I started Stephen King at like when I was 10 or 11. So,
That sounds about right.
mhm.
What is your favorite Stephen King book?
I don't know. It really bounces around. I think he just had a new collection come out 3 or 4 months ago called "You Like It Darker,"
Mm.
and it's great. There's even a kind of a Cujo sequel where it's the father from Cujo makes an appearance 40 years later or whatever. So,
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, it's really cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, we really appreciate your time, and this is your launch day, so I feel really fortunate.
Oh,
to
I
have
appreciate
you.
it so much. Yeah. Thanks for having me again. We gotta do it third, fourth, fifth time.
100%. You can come back anytime. We're all
Right.
loving watching you skyrocket and telling the world about your great books.
Thank you so much.
Don't forget about us humans back here on Earth.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Well, you can learn more about Keith Rosson at keithrosson.com and follow him on Instagram at Rosson Keith, on Twitter at Keith_Rosson, and Facebook. I think it's Keith.Rosson.7. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds right.
But you can go to his website, and his name is spelled R-O-S-S-N. I'm sorry, R-O-S-S-O-N.
There we go.
Get it right, Jennifer. And just buy these books. They're so good. What a wonderful way to support authors, read their work, tell people about it. You're going to love it. And like me, I had no idea how much I would love this book. And you will love it too. This has been another episode of The Premise. You can visit us online at thepremisepod.com and subscribe and rate or review The Premise wherever you get your podcasts. Those reviews really help us get the word out for people like Keith and The Premise and increase our subscriber base. So we really appreciate it, folks. You can also follow me, your host, on Instagram at Jennifer Grace, or follow me on Facebook at Jennifer Thompson Consulting. Until next time, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.